The Venaris wasn't built for war. It wasn't built for anything anymore, just a floating, neglected wreck, pressed into service because there was no other choice. Our assignment was a brutal irony. This ship, originally designed to heal, was now a prison for the infected. Men and women taken in by the virus that turned their bodies into grotesque weapons. In the end, Venaris did exactly the opposite of what it was intended for. Instead of a sanctuary, it had become a workshop of desperation and death. And I was part of it. My name is Alex Nolan. I serve as one of the last medics on this hunk of metal, floating through space in the company of the cursed. There's a reason I never leave the medbay if I can help it. The ship groans as though it's alive. Sounds from distant corners echo back like whispers, the kind that don't stop even when I'm alone. The air always smells of antiseptic, something I go through by the gallon, trying to stave off rot. But no matter how many times I scrub, nothing ever feels clean. On the Venaris, there is no such thing as clean. As I walk through the main corridor, I pass an empty stasis chamber. Not that we'd ever use it anymore. Power's been low for months, so we only keep essential systems running. The emergency lights give off a yellow glow, illuminating patchy walls and floors that haven't seen a proper cleaning since they put us up here. Everything feels like it's under a film of decay. Even me. I run a finger along my sleeve out of habit, feeling for any sign of stiffness in my skin. But it's just the uniform, clean as I can keep it anyway. I enter the medbay, and the familiar acrid scent of metal hits my nose. My workspace is chaotic, littered with half-assembled equipment and hastily cleaned tools. And on the operating table before me lies Corporal Ryan Sykes. He's the latest to be infected, and his right arm, well, what used to be his arm, extends out like a grotesque imitation of a blade, grown directly from his bone. Metal plates have begun to creep up his shoulder, inch by inch, as if testing the boundaries of what's left of him. As I stare down at Sykes' arm, I can't help but question the point of all this. We're keeping him alive, if you can call it that, holding back the infection with amputations and sedatives like sandbags against a flood. But the brass still has us down here hacking away, keeping them alive long enough for what? The orders are clear. Slow the spread, stabilize the infected, maintain humanity wherever possible. Command says they're working on a cure, that our job is to buy time until it arrives. I used to believe them. Now I'm not so sure. There's a chance that this cure, this mythical solution, is just a rumor meant to keep us going. But on the Venaris, where death is rarely permanent, you cling to any hope you can get, even if it's a lie. I take a deep breath, trying to push down the bile rising in my throat. These operations never get easier. Sykes' eyes are closed and he's already sedated, but his breathing is heavy, almost as if he knows what's coming. This virus, this hellish infection, it does more than change their bodies. Sometimes I think it changes their minds too. I can't explain why, but when I'm in the room with them, it feels like there's something left. Like they're aware of what's happening, aware of what I have to do. I pick up my blade, sharpened so many times it's taken on a dull, silvery gleam of its own. It's the same blade I've used for the last 100 amputations. This isn't surgery. Surgery is clean, methodical. What I do here is closer to butchery. I take a final look at Sykes' arm, knowing it'll grow back in some grotesque new form, but at least for now, I can give him a moment's reprieve. I steady my hand and make the first incision, watching as the metal separates from the flesh with a sickening sound, like peeling tin from rotten wood. Halfway through, I hear the door slide open behind me. Without looking, I know who it is. Dr. Sahira Lin. She's the only other medic still willing to get her hands dirty here. Need a hand? Her voice is soft, almost too gentle for this place. She hovers behind me, her gloved hands poised. I shake my head, not looking up. I've got it. Go check on the next one in line. She pauses, but I feel her eyes on me, a mixture of pity and concern that I don't want to acknowledge. We're just about out of sedatives, you know. Command hasn't sent a resupply in weeks. I know. I grit my teeth, steadying the blade as I dig deeper. Just do what you can. I don't like Dr. Lin's optimism. It feels like a weakness, like a crack in the wall that keeps us from going mad. But I can't ignore that her presence helps me keep going. I don't know if it's her hope or her naivete, but whatever it is, it holds the darkness back just a little. She leaves quietly, and I finish the operation, closing up the wound as best I can. Sykes mutters something in his sleep, and for a moment, I swear he's calling my name. Once Sykes is stable, I turn to the next patient. There's always a next patient. The virus doesn't sleep, and neither do I. My shift never really ends. Days and nights bleed into each other on the Venaris. I lost track weeks ago, and I suspect Command did too. We're just numbers in a log now, digits on a screen somewhere that no one bothers to read. After the amputation, I sit on the edge of my bunk, sharpening my blade with rhythmic mechanical strokes. Each scrape is a reminder. Keep going. Stay alert. There's a gnawing fear that someday I'll look down and see that telltale silver creeping under my own skin. I catch myself glancing at my hands, searching for the slightest glint, a sign that I'm next. It's irrational. But on the Venaris, paranoia is just another survival tool. I keep my quarters sterile, obsessively so. It's the one place I can feel almost human, even if that feeling only lasts a moment. The walls are scrubbed clean, the bed tightly made, and every tool is organized with military precision. It's ritualistic, a thin shield against the chaos outside. I need this order. It's the only thing keeping me grounded. Every night, I sharpen my blade. Every morning, I clean every surface. If I keep this up, maybe the infection won't come for me. Maybe. As I turn in for the night, the silence weighs heavy. In the distance, I can hear the groaning of metal against flesh. Sounds of the infected trying to move, maybe trying to remember what it was to be alive. It's enough to make anyone question their sanity, but I don't have the luxury of doubt. There's no room for weakness here, not on this ship, where even the dead don't rest. In the early hours of what I think is morning, an alarm goes off. I grab my equipment and rush to the medbay, where I find Sykes on the table, his eyes open, staring blankly at the ceiling. His breathing is shallow, uneven. I feel a chill crawl up my spine. The restraints on his arms and legs strain against his growing metal limbs, sharp edges already tearing at the leather. This wasn't supposed to happen. I sedated him, amputated the infected limb. But here he is, half alive, half something else, his eyes tracking me with a kind of recognition that sends a cold stab of fear through my gut. "Sykes," I whisper, stepping closer. His mouth twitches, his lips barely forming the shape of a word. "Doc." His voice is gravelly, like metal grinding on metal, and I step back involuntarily. Dr. Lin enters, taking in the scene. She moves to his side, checking his vitals, and glances at me, a flicker of panic breaking through her usual calm. "We need to secure him." Together we tighten the restraints, but he's stronger than I anticipated. The infection is spreading faster than I've ever seen, transforming him, replacing flesh with hard, unyielding metal. He fights us, his eyes flaring with a final spark of humanity before he goes limp, his body settling into an eerie stillness. We stand in silence, neither of us willing to acknowledge what just happened. Finally, Dr. Lin speaks. "Command needs to know about this." I scoff, bitterness seeping into my voice. "Command doesn't care. They've left us here, Sahira. You really think they're going to listen now?" She locks eyes with me. "We still have to try." I say nothing. There's no point arguing. Deep down, I think she knows I'm right, but she can't let go of the hope that somehow, someone out there is paying attention. After we secure Sykes' body, I retreat back to my quarters, exhausted but unable to rest. I sharpen my blade again, hands moving on instinct, the ritual grounding me. I replay Sykes' last moments in my head. The recognition in his eyes, the way he'd seemed to fight the restraints. He'd spoken, said my name almost as if he knew. I tell myself it's impossible, that it's just my mind playing tricks. But in this place, isolated and forgotten, reality itself feels malleable, twisted by fear and isolation. A part of myself slipping away with every patient I lose, every limb I sever, and I catch myself wondering if this ship will become my tomb too. The days are slipping away, blurring together in the silence of the Venaris. It feels like time has warped here, or maybe I have, slowly losing track of what each shift is meant to mean. I tell myself I'm just tired, too tired to feel the sick grip of fear tightening every time I walk down the hall, past the rows of silent patients with their bodies trapped in metal. Too tired to feel that unease growing in the back of my mind. But it feels as if the Venaris has become something twisted, where death is never really the end. This morning I'm called to the quarantine wing, a cold, windowless space on the lower decks that reeks of burnt circuitry and old antiseptic. It's where we hold the more aggressive cases, the ones that would spread infection faster than we can amputate. I walk in, and Corporal Harris is lying there, arms and legs bound in reinforced restraints. His body is riddled with patches of hardened metal, strange jagged shapes replacing what used to be muscle and bone. It's worse than Sykes. It's as if the virus has accelerated, reshaping him more completely, more viciously. His eyes are half closed, eyelids twitching as if he's caught between sleep and waking. I check the monitors, which flicker in protest, and frown at the readings. Harris's vitals are weak, showing almost no sign of life. But there's something else, an electrical surge, something in his body that doesn't belong. I lean closer, feeling a cold chill crawl over my skin. Harris's eyes snap open, and he lets out a groan that travels through the room. His metal-plated limbs jerk against the restraints, scraping against the metal bed, and I take a step back. It isn't the noise that scares me, it's the look in his eyes, that glint of recognition that chills me to my core. "Doc!" His voice is distorted and warped, as if the virus itself were trying to speak through him. The sound sends a cold wave down my spine. It shouldn't be possible. The infection is supposed to strip them of everything. Consciousness, memory, humanity. But Harris stares at me, his mouth moving as he repeats, "Doc, please." I don't know what to say. My throat dry, my body frozen as I watch him struggle. He breaks eye contact, his gaze darting around the room, looking as if he's searching for something beyond the walls, beyond me. Then with one last strained breath, he goes still again. The monitors flatline, the steady beep disappearing into silence. I stand there, staring at his lifeless body, his voice replaying in my mind. I've seen reanimated soldiers before, half dead, with limbs jerking and metal twisting as if animated by the virus itself. But this is different. Harris was speaking. He seemed aware, and that single moment, his whispered plea burrows deep into my mind, refusing to leave. Back in the med bay, I find Dr. Lin at her station. She's working with some of our remaining sedatives, carefully measuring out doses far too small to be effective, but the best we can do with our dwindling supplies. I approach her slowly, not entirely sure how to bring up what I'd just witnessed. "Dr. Lin," I start. "Harris was aware. At least I think he was. He spoke to me." She looks up, her eyes dark and tired, and shakes her head. "The virus plays tricks. I've seen it before. The infected sometimes make sounds, movements that feel familiar. But they're not aware, Alex. It's the virus taking over their bodies, hijacking their memories and muscle movements. It's nothing more." "No, this was different," I insist, trying to make sense of it myself. "He said my name. He looked right at me like he knew me. It wasn't just random movement." Lynn sighs, setting her tools aside. "Alex, you're exhausted. We both are. You've been on edge for weeks now, and I know the lack of sleep isn't helping, but whatever you think you saw, it wasn't him." I don't argue. I want to believe her, to think that it's just my mind fraying at the edges. But as I head back to my quarters, Harris's last word echoes in my mind, taunting me. I hear it in the silence, in the hum of the ship, and I can't shake it. I feel the weight of it in my chest, pulling me down like a stone. Later that night, as the ship settles into its quiet routine, I make my way back to the quarantine wing. I tell myself it's just to confirm that Harris is truly gone, but deep down, I know I'm lying. I'm chasing something. Proof maybe, or some sign that I'm not losing my mind. The room is dark, save for the blinking lights of the monitors, now all showing steady, flat lines. Harris's body is still bound to the bed, his limbs slack, his face frozen in fear and pain. I stand over him, studying the metal that has replaced his flesh. Each patch is unique, twisted and jagged, almost organic in its structure, as though it were growing with a life of its own. I don't know what I expect to find, but I lean closer, studying the shapes and lines in the metal. I notice something that sends a chill down my spine. A delicate engraving, hard to see, etched into the surface of his forearm. It looks like numbers, scratched in with a crude instrument. My heart pounds as I trace the marks with my gloved finger. 1492. It's not a date or an ID number, not something that would normally be there. But I remember it. That was Harris's bunk number. A sick, horrified realization washes over me. Somehow, in his final moments, he must have left a mark, an identifier. But that's impossible. The virus shouldn't allow for conscious thought, for intentional action. And yet there it is, scratched into the metal. I back away, a wave of nausea hitting me as I try to process what this means. I have to know more. I need answers, and I know I won't get them from Dr. Lin. She's buried herself in routine, clinging to protocol like a lifeline. She wouldn't believe me, would tell me it's stress, exhaustion. But I know what I saw. Back in my quarters, I rummaged through the equipment, looking for anything that might help me understand. I finally settle on one of the antiviral scanners, a device that was supposed to measure the spread of infection, but often fails due to the virus's unpredictable behavior. I sneak it back to the quarantine wing, ignoring the tightening in my chest, as I feel Harris's gaze on me, even now. The scanner activates, casting a green glow across his body as I run it over his chest, his arms, his head. The readings are erratic, flashing between data points that make no sense. Temperature fluctuations, bursts of electrical activity, and an anomaly I can't identify. I run the scanner over his head one last time, and there it is, an electrical spike. Something in his brain is still active. A wave of horror rolls through me, and I stumble back. The scanner drops from my hands, clattering to the floor. There's no rational explanation. Harris should be dead. But something in that virus, something twisted and malevolent, is keeping a piece of him alive. And if Harris is still somehow aware, then what does that mean for the others? In the days that follow, I can barely focus. Each time I pass one of the infected patients, I feel their eyes on me, as if they're watching. I start to question the sounds I hear in the night, the soft metallic clicks and groans that echo through the halls. My shifts become longer as I pour myself into understanding the virus. I start sneaking into Dr. Lin's lab, going through her research notes, anything that might explain what's happening. I find fragmented logs from command, vague reports mentioning enhanced adaptability and post-mortem consciousness, as if they knew, as if they were experimenting on us as much as on the infected. But it's all inconclusive. Just phrases on scraps of digital paper, nothing concrete. My paranoia spirals. I check myself for signs of infection multiple times a day, even when I know it's irrational. I catch glimpses of silver in my skin, only to realize it's just the dim lighting, the shadows playing tricks. I start avoiding mirrors, the sight of my own reflection unnerving. It's as if the Venaris itself is infected. This creeping madness spreading from patient to crew, metal to flesh. One night in the darkness of my quarters, I hear a sound. It's so soft, I almost think it's my mind playing tricks. But as I sit up, straining to listen, I hear it again. A voice, distant but familiar, calling my name. My heart races as I follow the sound through the ship's empty corridors. The voice becomes clearer, bouncing off the walls, until I reach the quarantine wing. And there, In the silence, I see him. Harris, lying on the bed, his eyes wide open, staring directly at me. His mouth opens, and he speaks, barely audible but clear enough. "Doc, please." The next morning I wake up drenched in sweat, Harris's voice still echoing in my head. I try to convince myself it was just a nightmare, just the stress catching up to me, but I know better. It was too real. His eyes, his voice, the fear in his face, it's a scene I can't shake, and one that leaves a growing pit of dread in my stomach. I catch myself scratching at my arm absent-mindedly. I've been doing that a lot lately. Just an itch, I tell myself. Just dry skin from the recycled air. But as I sit up and look down at my forearm, my breath catches. There, right beneath the surface, is a faint silvery sheen. My blood runs cold. It's unmistakable. The early stage of the infection, creeping up like a bruise made of metal. My mind races, thoughts colliding in panic and disbelief. This can't be happening. I've taken every precaution, more than anyone else on this cursed ship. But here it is, spreading like a stain under my skin, mocking my vigilance. I grab a pair of gloves from my workstation and pull them on, trying to hide it, as if ignoring it will somehow make it go away. For a while, I just sit there, numb and paralyzed. Then the practical side of me takes over. I know I can't let Dr. Lin find out. She's hopeful, yes, but she's also loyal to command. She'd report me in a heartbeat, thinking it's the right thing to do. I can't trust her with this. I'll have to keep it hidden, somehow manage to control it on my own. The day drags on. I continue with my duties, amputating infected limbs, administering the last of our sedatives, all while feeling that creeping metal spreading beneath my skin. Every movement, every touch, reminds me of what's happening, of what's coming if I can't stop it. 3 days later, I'm in the medbay with Private Natalie Walsh, a recent case of the infection. Her vitals are still stable, and her infection hasn't spread far yet, but the virus is already evident. A hard patch of metal replacing most of her left arm. She's staring at me with wide, terrified eyes, her breath shallow, her skin pale. "Doc," she whispers, her voice shaky. "How much longer do you think they'll take? Command, I mean, with the cure." I feel a pang of guilt, forced to lie again. "They're working on it, Private," I say, my voice as steady as I can manage. "We just have to keep fighting. We're close." She nods, but I can see the doubt in her eyes. We both know that the so-called cure could be a myth, but for her that slim hope is enough. And right now, hope is all she has. As I begin the prep for her amputation, I feel a sharp pain in my own arm. I clench my teeth, forcing myself to keep going, ignoring the growing discomfort. I tell myself I'm just tired, that it's all in my head. But as I reach for my scalpel, my hand trembles and the blade clatters to the floor. "Doc!" Natalie's voice brings me back, and I realize she's staring at me, worry clouding her expression. "Sorry," I mumble, picking up the scalpel with my gloved hand, hiding the infected arm behind my back. "Just a long shift. Nothing to worry about." She doesn't look convinced, but she doesn't press. I finish the procedure, my movements robotic, detached, as if I'm watching myself from a distance. When it's over, I retreat to my quarters, unable to face another patient. The infection has spread further up my arm, creeping toward my elbow. The metallic sheen is brighter now, unmistakable. I know what I have to do. That night I sit in my quarters, staring at the blade in my hand. It's the same blade I've used for countless amputations, honed to a fine edge after hours of sharpening. I turn it over, steeling myself for what's coming. I know that if I don't act now, the infection will spread, will consume me entirely. I can't let that happen. I'd rather lose an arm than lose myself. But as I bring the blade to my skin, a wave of dread washes over me. I hesitate, the cold steel hovering inches from my flesh. It's not just fear of pain that holds me back. It's something deeper, a primal terror that consumes me from within. The thought of severing my own arm, of taking that drastic, irreversible step, paralyzes me. I can't do it. I let the blade fall to the floor, my shoulders slumping as I sit back defeated. The infection has already taken hold. Amputation would only buy me a little time, and even then, who's to say it wouldn't spread to the rest of me? I'm trapped, caught between a desperate need to survive and the knowledge that my fate is sealed. The next day, Dr. Lin corners me in the medbay, her gaze sharp and suspicious. She's noticed my behavior, my reluctance to handle patients, my increased isolation. "Alex, something's wrong," she says, crossing her arms. "You've been avoiding everyone, acting strange. If you're infected, I'm not." I cut her off, my voice harsher than I intended. I can see the doubt in her eyes, the distrust. She's worried, but there's something else there too, something colder. Command's loyalty runs deep in her, deeper than I'd realized. She doesn't press the issue, but I know she's watching me. I have to be more careful, hide the infection better. But as the days pass, it becomes harder and harder. The pain in my arm is constant now, a dull, throbbing ache that never leaves me. I start wearing long sleeves, gloves, anything to cover the spreading metal. But it's only a matter of time before someone notices. One night, as I'm preparing to sleep, there's a knock on my door. I open it to find Dr. Lin standing there, her expression grim. "I know, Alex," she says. "I know you're infected." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I don't respond, don't deny it. There's no point. She can see it in my face, in the way I hold my arm. "We can manage this," she says, trying to sound reassuring. "There's an antiviral cocktail I've been working on. It's not a cure, but it might slow the spread. Give us more time." Her voice is steady, but I can see the fear lurking in her eyes. She's offering a lifeline, a chance to delay the inevitable. Part of me wants to refuse, to accept my fate and spare her the trouble, but the other part, the part that still clings to survival, to hope, nods. She administers the cocktail, a series of injections that burn as they enter my bloodstream. The pain is intense, worse than the infection itself, but I grit my teeth and bear it. When it's over, I collapse back onto my bunk, exhausted but grateful. For the first time in days, the pain in my arm fades, replaced by a numbness that spreads through my body. The next morning, I wake to find Dr. Lin gone, her equipment packed up, her station empty. I search the ship, but she's nowhere to be found. It's as if she vanished, leaving no trace behind. I don't know if she was called away by command, or if she left of her own accord, but the realization fills me with a deep, hollow emptiness. I'm alone again. The infection has slowed, but I know it's only temporary. The metal will spread no matter how many injections I take. It's only a matter of time before it reaches my mind, my heart, turning me into one of them. 3 days have passed since Dr. Lin disappeared, leaving me alone on the Venaris with the patients, infected soldiers who should be unconscious, unaware, but who I now suspect are far more aware than I'd once thought. My left arm is nearly immobilized now, covered in hard metallic plating that's inched upward, leaving the skin beneath stiff and cold. The antiviral cocktail bought me time, but it's running out. At night, the Venaris feels even more haunted. Sounds drift through the silence, faint whispers and metallic clicks, the groaning of restrained patients in the medbay. I catch myself holding my breath, listening, expecting to hear my name echoing back from the darkness, just like I did with Harris. The infection is slowing my movements. My breathing has grown shallow and tight, the skin around my ribs taut and rigid, as if metal is coiling beneath, taking control. In rare moments of clarity, I wonder if Dr. Lin knew her antiviral cocktail was just a temporary solution. Maybe she left because she couldn't bear to watch what she knew was inevitable. On the 4th day, the transmission comes, not as a voice, but as a line of cold, stark text flickering across the terminal screen in my quarters. I wasn't expecting it. Honestly, I thought Command had forgotten about us entirely. But there it is, glaring at me in white letters against the black void of the monitor. Mission successful. Data collected. Proceed to termination. I sit frozen, staring at the words as if they might rearrange themselves into something different, something less final. My mind feels sluggish, the infection in my arm spreading to my chest, each breath heavier than the last. The message loops twice, and then the screen fades to black. Venaris responds, its ancient systems rousing themselves in grim obedience. For a moment, I don't understand. But then it hits me. The Venaris isn't just a ship. It's part of the experiment. All of it. Me, the soldiers, even the virus. We're just data points on a graph. A testbed for something larger. The reanimations, the transformations, the desperate struggle to stabilize the infected. It was never about saving anyone. It was about gathering data on how far the virus could push us before we broke. A sick laugh escapes me as the realization sinks in. The transmission wasn't for me, it wasn't for Dr. Lin or for the infected soldiers. It was for the ship itself. A coded command to finish what had been started, to destroy everything. The Venaris is going to self-destruct. And the worst part, I feel relieved. I stagger to my feet, gripping the edge of the desk for balance, my infected arm dragging at my side like dead weight. The metallic plating has crept up to my shoulder now, locking the joint in place, but the pain barely registers. The relief dulls it, blunting the edge of my fear. I don't have to fight anymore. I don't have to keep cutting and amputating and pretending there's a way out of this nightmare. The Venaris will burn, and I'll burn with it. No reanimation, no grotesque transformation into one of the worst cases, just an ending. A real ending. I stumble into the hallway, the ship's lights dimming as its systems prepare for termination. The infected soldiers in the medbay stir as I pass, their heads turning in unison, their metal-bound bodies pushing against restraints. I avoid their eyes, but I can feel them watching me, sensing the shift, the finality in the air. Maybe they know what's coming, or maybe it's just the virus reacting, always one step ahead. The quarantine wing is where I end up. Not because I planned it, but because there's nowhere else to go. I lean against the wall, my chest heaving as I try to catch my breath. The countdown has started. I can hear it, the faint beeps of the central computer ticking away the seconds. I think of Sahira Lin, the last person I trusted, the last shred of hope I had. I should have seen it earlier, the way she avoided looking at the infected for too long. The way she clung to protocol like a shield. She knew. She must have known the truth long before I did. Maybe she didn't know the specifics, but she knew enough. Enough to leave. I replay the last time I saw her, standing in my quarters, offering me the antiviral cocktail with shaking hands. Her words come back to me now, heavy with unspoken meaning. We can manage this, I think. She must have been stalling, buying time until the transmission came. Until the experiment ended. She left me here to face it alone. I feel a surge of anger, hot and fierce, burning against the cold numbness creeping through my body. But it fades quickly, replaced by resignation. What does it matter now? She's gone, and I'm still here, just another variable in Command's experiment. Another piece of data. The countdown enters its final phase. The ship's intercom activates with a droning tone that rises and falls like a distant siren. The infected soldiers in the quarantine wing are silent now, their eyes fixed on me with an intensity that makes my skin crawl. I wonder if they feel the same relief I do, if they understand that this is the end. The floor beneath me vibrates, a tremor building as the ship's systems reach critical mass. I lower myself to the floor, leaning back against the wall. My infected arm feels heavier than ever, the metal encasing it glinting in the light. I trace the edge of the plating with my good hand, marveling at how seamlessly it's fused with my flesh. I wonder how much longer it would have taken before it consumed me entirely. Not long, I think. Not long at all. I close my eyes, listening to the groans of metal on metal as the Venaris prepares to end itself. My thoughts drift, pieces of memories surfacing and fading like waves on a dark shore. The faces of the soldiers I couldn't save. Harris with his pleading eyes, Sahira with her soft voice and quiet betrayals. And then finally, my own face, reflected back at me in the gleaming surface of my infected arm. I don't know how much of me is still human, how much is still Alex Nolan. But in this moment it doesn't matter. The ship will burn, and I'll burn with it. And maybe in the ashes, something better will rise. The final alarm sounds, a piercing wail that carries across the Venaris, loud enough to drown out everything else. I take one last breath, the air sharp and cold in my lungs, and let the relief wash over me. There's no fear, no hesitation, just an ending. The countdown reaches 0 and the world disappears in a burst of light and fire,